words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be always acceptable in thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our redeemer. Amen. I've been watching too much Roger Dangerfield. You can't really explain how something is broken or wrong or deficient unless you contrast it with something that is right and whole and functioning properly. So after Matthew, in the readings that we've been looking at this season so far, having established that Jesus is trying to explain to the religious establishment how they're completely wrong about exterior cleanliness and not talking about internal holiness, Matthew suddenly moves Jesus into Syrophoenician territory, which is kind of weird because Jesus said he only came to the lost sheep of Israel. But it's there that Jesus has a rendezvous with something that he's not yet found in Israel. The centurion had it, but he's not part of Israel. He's a Roman. Blind Bartimaeus will have it in an upcoming pericope when Jesus comes closer to his destiny at Jerusalem. The leper had it, but he may have very well have been a Samaritan, but he was certainly a non-citizen because of his disease. That was the rule. And as Jesus gets nearer to Jerusalem, just before his Last Supper with his apostles, the woman, remember, that anointed his feet with her hair, with the expensive ointment, she had it too. And Jesus acknowledges that. And of course, the Syrophoenician woman in our story this morning has it too. And that something is faith. Wait, I misspoke. The word is belief. It's translated faith, but I believe that's erroneous. She believed. But believe is a word, is a verb. She had belief. She believed. What did she believe? Well, before we get to that, it's simple and important to put this into the context of our modern situation. We spent some time this morning doing that. According to the religious establishment, this is a test question. You don't have to answer. What is the problem of the church today? We all recognize that there's a problem. I'm not trying to be a wise guy. But what's the problem? How do we explain the problem? Low attendance, is it a lack of seriousness? Apathy, ignorance, cognitive dissonance. Oh, I love that word. How about a lack of content? There might be some truth in all of those. And we'll probably always have problems in those areas all the time. But I would assert that none of those are at the root problem. I'd give you extra credit if you knew what the root problem was, because I've said it a few times and banged the podium when I said it. But before I give you the answer, the content of what we believe is very, very important. I remember a taped lecture that I heard from one of my favorite teachers of all time, Dr. Francis Schaeffer, and the title was Two Contents, Two Realities. And of course, by realities, he was talking about living the faith properly, etc., etc. It was a great tape. And it was probably that tape that galvanized my resolve to actually go visit him in Switzerland and see the reality of what L'Abri was. I had devoured his books. I had outlined them. I pored over every word. Now I wanted to see the reality of L'Abri, why he was so popular in answering the questions of the young people. And they were coming to him from all over Europe and in America, especially the university students, because he had answers to their questions. And one of Schaeffer's enduring criticism of the church was that it lacked content. And he also says we lack reality. We don't have orthodoxy of doctrine, and we don't have orthodoxy of community. We don't have true spirituality, and we don't have true healing in our relationships. We're talking about this very thing in our Thursday night Lenten study. Reality, spiritual reality. But as I studied over the years the content and reality of Schaeffer's work and his criticisms over the next 3 decades, long after he died in 1984, the problem that I saw was not lack of seriousness or apathy or ignorance or cognitive dissonance or the lack of orthodoxy or lack of content. It was something more primary. And you'll probably, I hope you remember when I die, if there's one thing I remember about Paul, it's this one thing that he kept on saying over and over again, and it's belief. It's not that our faith was defective in any of these areas, in any of these ways, and I don't mean this in an insulting way, because I'm talking about the church in general. We talked about it this morning. Nobody's insulted, right? The problem is that we don't have faith in some areas. We don't have belief. I didn't have any when I did the analysis. I didn't have any. And this analysis started at least as far back as 2000 for me. But I realized it earlier than that. Not in a biblical sense, I didn't believe. And it's no wonder that I wasn't moving any mountains. Because if I had a grain of mustard seed of that, whatever it was that was lacking, I would be able to move mountains. The Bible says so. There was nothing wrong with my faith if by faith you mean assenting to a list of propositions. You just sort of subscribe to it. As easy as you would say, I'm rooting for the Steelers. Or I like yellow, don't like blue. My problem was that I didn't believe, just like Peter didn't believe, when he said, I don't even know this person, to the young maiden. Functionally, I was a deist. We illustrated that's the functional religion of the young people today. They're deists. They only call on God when they're in trouble. I was functionally a deist. I basically lived my life until things got rough. And then I remembered to call on God. Perhaps I was even an agnostic. Thank God he kept me out of the ministry until I did believe, or I had a modicum of belief. And so as I examined my belief, or lack of it, over the next decade, when I compared it to the examples that the New Testament is giving to us, like this Syrophoenician woman, I asked myself, what is it specifically that he is commending in these people that I don't have? What is it about their faith that is, or belief, that is missing in mine? Because he did say, after all, if I had belief as a grain of a mustard seed, I could move a mountain. Ergo propter hoc. I had no faith. All these doctoral students know what that is, right? And as soon as I said that, I knew what the problem was. The problem was I just didn't have any faith. I didn't have a mustard seed of faith. That's the only thing that can explain it. The problem was that I didn't believe. I'm doing the self-examination. Because, of course, the apostles don't have two words for belief and faith. It's just one word, belief. One's a noun and the other's a verb. Pistuo is the verb. And the minute that I stopped talking about it as if it were a noun and began thinking about it as if it were a verb, I immediately saw what the problem was. I had the noun, but I didn't have the verb. I didn't believe. The Syrophoenician woman believed. I didn't. The centurion believed. I didn't. The publicans and the harlots believed. I didn't. In fact, the author of Hebrews gives a whole list of people who believed, and he even gets into their psychology and tries to explain to us what this act of believing looks like. And he tells us about their amazing exploits. Let me just give you a few of them. Their exploits because they believed. They subdued kingdoms. They wrought righteousness. They obtained promises. They stopped the mouths of lions. Did he really do that? Quenched the violence of fire, escaped the edge of the sword, out of weakness were made strong, waxed valiant in fight, turned to flight the armies of the aliens. I should probably stop here, but let me just... Women received their dead raised back to life again. And others, this is before the New Testament, by the way. And others had trial of cruel mockings and scourgings. I don't want to read that, that's too depressing. Jeremiah went through that. Why? Because he believed. Would we go through the trials of cruel mockings? Will we be beheaded like Sir Thomas More did? I don't know. I guess we're not going to know unless we're actually put under pressure, like the early Christians were when they knocked on the door and asked if they would give a pinch of incense to Caesar. That's all that's required. If you don't, Colosseum. If you do, you can go about your life. What's wrong with our churches is that we can't move mountains. What's wrong with our churches is that we can't even move a molehill. And that's why the church, take this to the bank, as Nancy would say, that's why we're constantly searching for humanistic solutions to play church. And guess who sees that? Like we were talking this morning, our young people. They see us grasping at these humanist solutions in order to keep our church running. The world looks at our efforts too. It sees that hypocrisy, our worldliness, and our scandals. Oh, by the way, one of my examples of true spirituality is a book written by A Taste of New Wine by Keith Miller. I'm going to throw the fire out here now instead of saving. And the main point that he made was that we are bred to deceive. And one of his chapters is Jeremiah 17:9, I think it is. The heart is deceitfully wicked above all things. Who can know it? It's desperately corrupt. Oh, that's a big project there. Well, he cheated on his wife. Because I went back to get his book, he probably is on the 4th edition now. He cheated on his wife, Keith Miller. He's still out there making the circuit, the evangelical circuit, but the world sees that and says, well, these guys are not right. There's nothing to see here. Just people playing at religion. There's plenty of content, right? And there's plenty of seriousness here too. The Mormons have seriousness. And the Muslims certainly have plenty of seriousness. They'll crash planes into our big buildings. But there's no personal victory over sin. And there's no victory in the world. Not like we just read about in Hebrews. And you can multiply this lack of victory over personal sin or corporate sin 1,000 times. And you can fill the church to the brim with 10,000 parishioners. But if there's no spiritual reality, no victory of sin in their individual lives, there'll be no victory over sin corporately either, politically or in the church or in our marriages. And that's what Hebrews is talking about. That's the problem in our churches today. The problem is we don't believe. It's like an algebraic solution. It has to be. If we were reading the New Testament seriously, that's what we would see in it. And the New Testament gives us a sort of a static solution. It's there. It's written down. And the world also gives a solution. Their solution is stop being hypocrites. And Christ invited the world to judge the church. They did so in the Gospel of John. If they don't perform this way, then they have a right to say, you're not my disciples. It's the judgment of Scripture and it's the judgment of the world. Thus, out of the mouth of unbelievers, God has perfected perfect praise. The New Testament is full of stories about people who don't believe, too. The Jewish establishment, the Apostle Peter, as we've talked about, the Judaizers themselves. But they are also full of people who do believe. And they give examples: the Syrophoenician woman, the centurion, blind Bartimaeus, the leper, the hemorrhaging woman. We didn't mention her before. Or the 4 that carried the paralyzed man. They undid the roof. They lowered him down. They believed. You're going to climb up on that roof. If you don't believe something miracle is going to happen, you're not going to throw off your cloak in the middle of winter. Maybe it was early spring. Thinking that you may have to search for it again. He may not actually cure you. He believed that he wasn't coming back to that site. He believed that Jesus was going to cure him. The woman who anointed Jesus and washed his feet with tears, you think she believed? Stephen, the proto-martyr, who just stood there and they stoned him to death because he was preaching. I think he believed too. St. Paul believed. St. John, St. Timothy, for whom this church is named. They all believed. And the church that was spawned through their tireless efforts defeated the religious superstitions, the legacy of the Persians, the legacy of the Greeks, the legacy of the Romans and Christianity, conquered the world. Can we do that again? I don't know. I think we can. It says we can. Christianity conquered the world. They conquered the catacombs. They conquered the Colosseum. They conquered all of the combined might of the ancient world because these people believed. It's this faith that we should be comparing the present impotence of the church. Because as we look at the pages of the New Testament, even if it were but just a casual perusal, there's something so radical in there that if we did believe it, just a very few of us, we could and would turn the world upside down because it would completely radicalize our lives. Not only in how we live, but because of the spiritual power that would then be in our lives to conquer personal sin and to conquer the world and redeem it from sin, to participate in the effort of redeeming it from sin. And this, I'm afraid, is what Lent is for. Lent is to examine the content and the reality of our faith. We always do the content. Now we're talking about true spirituality on Thursday nights. It's a time for asking ourselves hard questions like, why aren't we turning the world upside down? If you can come up with another answer besides we don't believe, then I'd love to hear it. And I would love to, if it's money, then let's give more money. If it's the wrong kind of architecture, if it's more children's programs, then let's do that and see if that works. I would assert that when we understand what Jesus and what Matthew is trying to show us through the story of the Syrophoenician woman, when we understand the difference between those who believe and those who don't believe, there's clearly shown in the New Testament. When we look into our own souls and investigate why it is that significant levels of unbelief still live there, like pockets and eddies and caves and coves, then we will know why the church is in trouble. And we will know what is so troubling us. Amen.